Hello everyone, welcome back to Morgan's movie collection. 1933's The Kiss Before the Mirror is a really interesting pre-code movie about the paranoia of marital infidelity, where a man has to defend his friend in a murder trial after he kills his unfaithful wife at the beginning of the movie. Yet he becomes very anxious about his own marriage throughout, building to a really, really great courtroom climax and a great monologue by our leading actor in this movie, in this particular performance as well. This movie also has a flair of the Gothic melodrama about it, which makes sense, really, when you consider not only is it just simply a universal picture of its time, but this movie's director is most famous for being such a key component of the Universal monster movie series that is James Whale, most famously, of course, of Frankenstein, The Bride of Frankenstein, The Invisible Man. He is, he should be remembered more for not just those movies. He has a career outside of horror movies, including, of course, this one. We're also dealing with, as a cinematographer here, the director of 1932's The Mummy, and frequent Universal monster cinematographer Karl Freund, who came from German Expressionism and those movies in the 20s. So this movie really does have it has a grand feel to it, particularly in its home settings, but that's contrasted really, really well when we have scenes in a dungeon where Paul Lukas's character spends most of this movie, where these really enormous, stark shadows on the wall tower over the characters in these scenes. It's a very striking imagery, and a lot of that sense is wonderfully created in this movie. And as far as James Whale movies go as well, I felt this was very, very polished, particularly compared to something like Frankenstein, which at times feels perhaps raw, I guess. Maybe this is just due to the nature of the really beautiful quality of the Blu-ray that this movie comes under. The opening of this movie does come with quite a shock right at the end when Paul Lukas does kill his wife, and it's a really quite beautifully romantic opening. Gloria Stewart is playing his wife in this opening, opposite a young Walter Pidgeon as well. So there's name recognition to be had even in the supporting cast in this little pre-code movie, which is always nice to see. It kind of makes you almost want to see the movies more, I think, when you can recognise quite a good few names. And I mean, our male lead in this movie is Frank Morgan, who is, of course, the Wizard of Oz. Nancy Carroll is our female lead. They are a great match with each other, strangely, because they follow similar character trajectories in the movie, I guess, or at least a similar build of anxiety. And I think this is really where the movie does shine. Nancy Carroll's bringing this real, elegant, confident performance in the first sort of third of the movie. But when Frank Morgan's suspicions of her infidelity are kind of, portrayed to be true, she, like him, just becomes more anxious and anxious as the movie goes on. It's a very suspenseful movie, and tinged with all this kind of grand Gothic melodrama as well. it makes for a very, very fascinating watch. And given that it's a pre-code movie, we can be frank with talking about this kind of subject matter. Interestingly, it was remade, I think, 5 years after by James Whale as well, under a different title. And there's a really great special feature on the Blu-ray I'll be showing that compares these two movies. It's what I love about Pre-Code is their frankness with, or their ability to be so frank in talking about what would quickly be considered strictly taboo matters, and it just treats affairs as commonplace. Marriage is not always seen as righteous and entirely good, and it makes it more of an interesting, thoughtful style of movie. I mean, I'm so thankful that pre-code movies do exist, but I'm so always upset that they only existed for such a short period of time, really only 4 years, until the strict censorship production code was brought in halfway through 1934. You find such interesting, real, honest depictions of violence, of sexuality, of infidelity, of drug use, and all these what you would consider taboo subjects dealt with in such real, honest ways. And this is a very real, honest movie. I think this is a very down-to-earth movie. Particularly Nancy Carroll, I think, does give a really, really down-to-earth performance that you can have an awful lot of sympathy for. I think she is really... Strangely enough, she is our sympathetic character in this movie, even though Frank Morgan is our lead. Although we are made to feel a lot of sympathy for Paul Lukas as well, who is full of pain in this movie, full of anguish in his performance as the man that has killed his wife at the very beginning, and is put on trial. He is despairing with himself throughout the whole movie. He loved his wife so much, which drove him to commit that drastic act. Perhaps a highlight character of the movie for me is another one of the women here, who is Hilda, played by Jean Dixon, who is Frank Morgan's kind of, or one of the other lawyers on Frank Morgan's team, as he's defending Paul Lukas in this case. She is very modestly dressed compared to Nancy Carroll. There's a few scenes of her being very admiring of Nancy Carroll, and she speaks an awful lot about the benefits of a single life. She's a very queer-coded character, and this is another just fascinating area of pre-code characterization that is so interesting to look into and seek movies out that have it in. And he's just something that becomes so less and less prevalent once you really get into the heavy coded years, as it were. I find her character really engaging in this movie, such a contrast to what we can be often used to seeing in old Hollywood movies from women, and wonderfully so. I think she's giving such a dry, quite comedic at times performance, but that's not to say that this movie ever wants to be a comedy, even though I suppose there's also another somewhat comedic relief character in there, played by another cast member of The Wizard of Oz, Charlie Grapewin, who is another one of Frank Morgan's assistants in this movie. The paranoia continues to build and build until we are treated to that wonderful outburst at the end of a monologue at the very end. And I must say as well, to wrap it up and finish, God bless the 70-minute runtime of this movie. Bring it back. Bring back the 70-minute runtime. What a wonderful pace of movie this is. You can find this Blu-ray from Indicator, which is still in its limited edition form of 3,000 copies, I think. It is beautiful to look at, such a great restoration here, and a fascinating little movie from a director that you may not think of made movies like this, because you just think of him as a horror director, which is not a bad legacy to have when you look at those horror movies. But this movie should be well up there as well. This is a real little gem, and certainly if you're a fan of pre-code movies and their tendencies, you need to watch The Kiss Before the Mirror. It is great. Until next time, that is going to do it. Goodbye.